Hello and welcome to Complementary Training podcast. My name is Mladen Jovanovic and I'm going to be your host. In today's episode, I'm talking to David Watts. David Watts is a lead strength conditioning coach from Brisbane, Australia, where he is currently employed as strength conditioning coach at Queensland Academy of Sport. David is working in multiple athletes, multiple sports, and I took this opportunity to talk to him regarding licensing schemes of the Australian Strength Conditioning Association, his role within Queensland Academy of Sport, as well about his viewpoints regarding the differences and similarities of coaching and working with different sports and different athletes, and as well as developing a valid and reliable movement screen. We are also touching topics such as velocity-based training and data management. Enjoy this episode. This episode of Complementary Training podcast is sponsored by Smartbase. Smartbase platform is truly unique athlete data management solution for professional, college, Olympic sports, military, performing arts, and research. Smartbase encapsulates the ability to integrate all forms of data from many different sources of technology such as GPS, Omega Wave, Elite Form, and many others. It has unparalleled reporting features, offering the user access to any data in the system within 3 clicks of the mouse. Available on Mac, PC, and mobile apps with or without internet. Most importantly, it is completely customizable platform that you develop based on your needs and workflows for your data. With support teams based in the USA, UK, and Australia, Smartbase is in over 115 organizations in more than 10 countries. If interested, contact them on info@fusionsport.com. In episode 3 of the Complementary Training podcast, I'm talking to David Watts. David Watts is a lead strength and conditioning coach from Brisbane, Australia. David is currently employed as strength conditioning coach at Queensland Academy of Sport, where he works over 6 years with athletes from a wide variety of sports. Thanks for taking your time to do this interview, David. Glad to have you on Complementary Training podcast.
It's no troubles at all, Mladen. To be perfectly honest, I've been a follower of yours for a long time, so it's a privilege to be involved.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Glad you're following it, and glad if you find something useful from Complementary Training.
Yeah, I love it. It's all great stuff.
Thanks. Anyway, you are level 3 of Australian Strength Conditioning Association.
Yep.
So that's a licensing scheme. And Can you please tell the listeners more about the license and how the whole system, behind Australian Strength Conditioning Association licensing works?
Yeah. Well, basically, the ASCA is sort of the governing body for S&C in Australia. So I guess they've got a global idea or a global aim of bridging the gap between sports science and practical application. So in contrast to some of the other organisations, it's probably a little bit more real world orientated, the S&C, which I'm a really big fan of. The organisation itself is led by the enigmatic President Dan Baker, he's obviously one of the best strength coaches in the world, and really lives up to that motto of practical application. So anyway, the licensing structure has basically got 2 sides to the equation. We've got level 1, 2, and 3 courses. So this is I guess your homework, the things that you have to tick off along the way, and the actual courses that the ASCA runs. And then we've also got the professional coaching scheme, which has 4 levels to it, the intern, professional, elite, and master coaches. So each one of those kind of progresses up and becomes, more and more difficult to achieve, based on experience and time in the field as well. Going back to the levels, the level 1 is really just about sort of dipping your toes in the water more than anything else with S&C. So it's really something that's good for, say, sports coaches trying to get a better understanding of S&C, athletes even trying to wrap their head around it, physical education teachers, things like that. But then the next level, the level 2, this is kind of, for the way I think about it, is, you want to show that you're able to swim. You know S&C pretty well, so you have to have done your level 1 to start with. But this should set you up to work in the field and be a professional coach. So once you've got your level 2, you can then look to move into the professional scheme, and that's either through an intern to start with, or straight into a professional coach, depending on how many hours that you've done so far in actual hands-on S&C coaching. I think that's a really important part to this, is that it's not just about your knowledge, but it's really about your experience as well. And something that's just fundamentally important to S&C coaching is you have to have that hands-on experience.
I think
sorry,
I think that a license expires, right? So it's for about 3 or 5 years, and then you need to renew it, unless you're working in a professional setting. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it'll automatically renew as long as you've been continuing to work in the field. But say if you take some time away and you have an extended time away, then you can't renew it at that point. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head how long that is, but it's something that needs to be renewed on an ongoing basis. Membership is yearly, and that sort of, you go through the coaching scheme process as part of going through the membership to the ASCA as well. So if you sort of wrap it into one box at one time, it sort of takes care of itself.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. But then the final level, the level 3, is really sort of directed at those coaches who've been around for a reasonable amount of time. They've developed a large sort of knowledge base to build from, and the level 3 is really that high level coach, where we're looking for something more than just the permission to play. We're looking for someone who's really going above and beyond the norms in the field. So you have to be working in a high performance environment, and you have to have done your level 2 as a minimum. But then you also have to apply to the ASCA to undertake that course. So that level 3 is actually changing a little bit at the moment. We've actually been working on some of the material to change how it's actually assessed. So it had previously been basically a 40,000 word workbook, effectively, where you are reflecting upon your practices in the S&C field. But it's going to change a little bit. We haven't completely finalised that as yet, so I can't sort of speak to that anymore. But hopefully it should be, probably think of it this way, it's going to be a little bit harder to get into the course, but then it should also be a little bit easier to complete the course.
Yeah, so you're currently level 3. How long does it took you to reach that level?
So I did my level 2 in 2011, and then an opportunity came up to do it in 2014 to attend the course. So I attended the course with a colleague from QAS, Michael Davey, and following that, it was probably a year of sort of head down, just knocking off 1,000 words, as I could, when I could. And then, delivering it back in. And then the actual, I forgot to mention the final component of the level 3 is to be able to sit down and defend your workbook as well. So you have to be able to justify everything that you've done in that workbook and show that in front of a group of 5 other level 3s that, you know this inside and out, and you've got a real appreciation for what you've written down.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good scheme, and what we are trying to do at the moment, we might try to organize a Serbian Strength and Conditioning Association and try a partnership with the Australian organization and use some of the schemes and models there, which I find really, really unique and quite, I would say, interesting. And they actually make you continuously learn and actually work in the field. So something that we are actually really looking for. So you are currently with Queensland Academy of Sport. So you've been there for more than 6 years, right? And can you tell us more about the experience there and your current role?
Yeah. Look, first and foremost, I got to say that QAS is an amazing place to work, and we are really, really fortunate with the support that we get from the Queensland government and also from our higher managers to really have a great facility and a great place to grow and develop. Primarily, the Queensland Academy of Sport, we work with developmental athletes who are along the high performance pathway to getting towards a national team program. We do also obviously work with Olympic athletes and national team athletes, but probably they would make up maybe 20% of our total athletes, whereas most of them across the board are developmental in nature. Getting started with the QAS, I guess I was an athlete to begin with, so that kind of helped in terms of knowing some people there. But went through the interview process for an internship at the end of my third year of my undergraduate degree, and did 3 months of sort of unpaid interning under Dr. Anthony Georgie and Kieran Young, probably two of the best mentors I had along the way. And this is the stuff that I think still really valuable. It's just being around, asking lots of questions, and I think it's going to play a part in S&C for a long time to come. And it's just the high performance nature of it. You've got to be able to accept that there will be unpaid, voluntary type stuff that you need to do to gain experience. But following on for that internship, I took on a role working with under 20 footballers, women's under 20 footballers, and this was under Michael Davey. And then I was extremely fortunate that probably about a month after I'd started that, Jeremy Shepherd left the QAS for Surfing Australia. And so I took on the role that he was doing with the junior volleyball program. So that was a pretty intimidating start to step into the shoes of quite possibly one of the best guys in the field. But that's where I got my start with the QAS, and then since then I've really just been building up, working with a bunch of different sports, and I'm now at the point where I'm a senior S&C coach in our physical performance unit, and I do a few sort of side projects with the academy as well. I'm sort of playing a large role in the implementation of the Fusion Smarter-based system. And this is an extremely challenging role to play because we service so many programs. So trying to roll the system out across 20 sports takes quite a lot of legwork and a lot of communication, but really, really extremely valuable stuff comes from it.
Yep.
And finally, sorry, mate.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, one thing I'm because I'm doing the similar role is that I'm wondering how do you manage to wear different hats? By this I mean being I would say muscle-head at the gym, and then thinking more analytically and designing database and solutions and forms in Smarterbase. Yeah.
Well, I'd say look first and foremost, I'm a strength coach, and I fully appreciate that's my first love, and it'll always be that way. But I see an extraordinary amount of value to having a few more strings to your bow. In terms of playing those different roles, I think it's just important that you understand how to manage your time effectively and how to become as efficient as possible in each of those roles. So, for example, with our Smarter-based system, there's absolutely no way that I would be able to implement it with all 20 sports just straight off the bat. So what I've tried to do is really look for the early adopters within our academy and look to them as the people who we're going to work really hard with to start with and get their systems up and running, get them working at a high level so that we can show value to the other programs. As you say, it is challenging to wear different hats, but it means that I've got a bigger skill set to sort of bank on, and I can see things from a few different perspectives, which I feel helps in the long run. So, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense as long as you have, I guess, enough of time and to do both.
Yeah. And look, if you ask any of the people working around me at the moment, they would probably suggest that I probably don't have enough time. But like it's being smart and knowing when to say no, which I'm slowly but surely getting better at. But yeah, look, it is extremely valuable stuff if we can get this system up and functioning at the level we want it to.
Yeah, I guess that having I would say skin in a game, to use Nassim Taleb expression, or being there where the rubber meets the road, or actually being with the coaches and being with the athletes, help you to see that certain workflows might work better when you organize the Smarabase or any other athlete management software, as opposed to being, I would say, not involved, and then you might try to experiment with something that might not suit the workflow of the coaches. So I guess that's a great positive thing that helps out.
Absolutely, and like that's to me is like the biggest part of this, right? Like if we think about it, is actually getting the data in there. Like what is the workflow that is going to work best to help those who are actually working in this field get the information into the system that they need? Because without it being there, then what are we talking about? Nothing even works. And a really good a good friend of mine down at Geelong, Owen McLean, he's come up with some really novel ways of how he sort of went about this, and simple things like some of his coaches just prefer to write things down on pen and paper. So he went out and built a stylus version of how they were going to collect their information. So sorry, I mean using a stylus on an iPad. So finding those ways that are going to work with the coach and with the individual to make sure that the data does actually get collected is the foundation of that system, if you ask me.
Yes, a couple of years back, I get an idea of having a scanner. So pretty much, if you use a paper collection, you collect data using paper, like screening or medical reports or something like that. Now we have technology that advanced that can, like first of all, they can recognize the text, and then we can do a text mining. And in some cases, there's much more information in text as opposed to only, trying to use sliders, so using rates or scales or something like that. So that's something, that definitely needs to be, I guess, more implemented in sports. Like, just scanning up the records and just being able to actually collect all those non-numerical data, I would say, qualitative data inside, and then we might use the more advanced data mining / machine learning techniques to try to pull out the meaning out of the text. So something that definitely needs to be implemented more in sports. Anyway, to continue talking about the muscle head function, so you've been dealing with a lot of athletes from different sports, and this is something that intrigues me all the time because I've been working with multiple sports. But what surprises me is that every time you go in a different sport, coaches think that their sport is like special and they need special requirements. Yeah. And out of from your experience working with different sports and different coaches, what are your thoughts on similarities and differences when it comes to physical preparation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've already alluded to my general thoughts on this, and you hear it so often, like when you step into a new role with a new sport, is my sport's different, it's special, it's something that you need to consider this. But look, over my time and what I've learned from working with many different sports is I've got different end products in terms of the competition, but for me, sport specific will always come second to individual specific, and by that I mean we have some highly talented athletes that walk through our door. Like hockey players who can hit a moving target from 90 yards away repeatedly, but they're the same individuals who can barely balance on a single leg. They can't do a push up, they can't do they can barely hold a handstand, things like this. So first and foremost, the foundation of any of the programs that happen here with our developmental athletes is we just got to establish foundational movement competency. if we don't have that foundation or that base, I guarantee people break down, and they're not going to be able to go to that next level. And it's another part of this issue of junior athletes is, it's easy. Well, okay, it's not easy, but there are heaps of athletes who are successful as juniors who don't make it to seniors. And I think a massive component of what happens from a developmental level up to a senior level is that the physical demands in so many of the sports that we work with are so much higher. So my general opinion from working with many sports is that while yes, there are sport specific demands, I still fundamentally believe that we need to achieve a foundational level of movement, competency, strength, and endurance before we even start contemplating layering in sport specific components to the program. For example, I'm currently working with field hockey, rowing, water polo, and golf. All very, very different sports. But I'll tell you what, we in all those programs, we squat, we deadlift, we bench press, we bench pull. Maybe to different extents and for different reasons and with different variations based on a little bit of coaching feel as much as anything. But, the foundations of what they required, the foundations of human movement means that I need to establish that first. And probably second to that, I think another fundamental area for development in this group is the basics of, say, goal setting and commitment and training intensity and making sure these athletes understand the basics of recovery as well. That's the stuff that no one can argue with regarding being special or specific to a sport. That's the basics of a high performance athlete, if you ask me, is getting that commitment and training intensity at the level it needs to be. And then the understanding of being in my mind, a 24-hour athlete. So, yes, you need to have your psychological recovery. That is a huge component of recovery. But you also need to be able to understand that you also need to make sacrifices. And some of those sacrifices are things like, having a regular sleeping pattern, eating properly when your social group doesn't eat in the same way as you do. The way that you interact with some of the socio-cultural norms within your culture. And in Australia, the alcohol culture is a big part of it. So, there's these things that you need to weigh up the cost benefit for yourself as an athlete and go, well, do I want to win a gold medal, in a few years' time, or do I want to be with my friends doing the normal thing? So I think that side of the equation is really, really important too.
So pretty much you need to look at the whole athlete and evaluate the athlete as a whole instead of looking at only physical components of the sport. Which I guess that's more like being a performance manager. And I think that we are more and more evolving to that type of I would say preparation rather than isolating things and saying and just looking things from a physical perspective. And another I would say another model that helps my decision making is that all this implementation we do have two components. And I'm going to allude to Nassim Taleb. I would say via positiva or upside. So what do we get from implementing certain strategies? So in terms of benefits, and the via negativa or avoiding downside, and what do we get from I would say avoiding certain risk if we implement or / don't implement certain strategies. So depending on the level of the athlete, I might say that physical preparation or strength training might be more related to avoiding downside rather than yielding the positive benefits of being improved performance. And by this, I mainly refer to being more robust athlete, being more able to withhold or withstand the training loads, specific training loads from your sport. And being, I would say injury proof, if that's a right term to use, or just being more robust to a training load. So rather than strength training improving performance, which it does, but I would say that the emphasis shift from developmental athlete, where the physical preparation actually improves performance more when you compared to when you're working with already high level athletes. And in that case, in my opinion, again, is that physical preparation and strength training might be more related to avoiding the downside and keeping the player on the pitch, which is in my opinion the most important component of success.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure David Joyce just tweeted something that reiterated that completely this morning, and it was something along the lines of days lost to injury this season in the EPL, and what do you know, like Leicester's second in line. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I usually talk about with John Life from New Zealand, who's working for High Performance Sport New Zealand, is this study that showed that more successful teams have less injuries as opposed to less successful teams. So less successful teams have more injuries, but we also pretty much can't make any causal claims from that. So it might also be that if you want to be less injured, if you want to have less injuries in your team, you better be successful. I would say it's circular, and in this case mean that if you are playing well, you are winning, the culture in the team is optimistic, and I would say your hormonal levels are different, so your body can accept much more training load as opposed when you're injured. So talking about Leicester, I'm not sure they played many international games this season. So one thing that look at their success is that the injuries they had, or actually they didn't have, might be related to them not playing many international games and hence being more successful in a domestic competition. So not to decrease their tremendous success this season, but something to think about as well.
There's always more depth to every situation, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so one of the current projects you're involved at the moment is establishing a valid and reliable movement screen.
Yep.
Can you tell us more about that? And I know that Cook's functional movement screen is always a hot topic, and I've been critiquing some of that stuff recently on Twitter and blog and Facebook. And so my main question is, what are you trying to achieve with implementing a movement screen, and why is that different than, say, observing a athlete in training session, like within your own normal warm-ups and your normal workouts?
Yeah, and absolutely, and like I agree. The movement screening for us is about directing the programming we're going to implement with someone who realistically we haven't seen before. So new athlete comes through the door. Okay, what am I now going to write for this program? And then the other side of that coin, then, so we want to know what we need to improve. And then the other side of that for me is that I think a fundamental aspect of our job is about improving our athletes' ability to move efficiently and fluently, and in any demand that is really required of them. So I think we also need to have good data to support that we have actually done that. It's a KPI to be achieved. So let's test this in a valid and reliable way, so that we can show that yes, so and so has actually improved their movement quality. The reason that we've gone into this project recently is because we found that there wasn't really any consistency in the movement screenings that were being done across our programs, and even within coaches. So as we've got a lot of developmental coaches here as well, so as they start to learn and grow and think in new ways, they might do some different things, and then the movement screening would change quite often. So you wouldn't be able to consistently, you wouldn't be able to compare from the last one it went through. So a few of us here at the QAS got together and started working on creating a reliable and valid movement screen. And I'm going to sort of steal from Dan Baker here for a second and just go, well, his favorite, one of those quotes that gets put out a lot is, novice coaches copy, good coaches modify, great coaches innovate. Now, here at the academy, I think there's some good coaches here. We're probably not on the great quite yet, but we'll get there in time. But anyway, so we decided, well, let's go and find something that's working well, has been shown to be valid, has been shown to be reliable, and then sort of modify it to based on what our needs are. And probably the one that we found to have the highest reliability was the AAA from Ian McEwen, or Macca's from your working environment, actually.
Yeah.
So what we liked about this with this method was that it had great inter-tester reliability and intra-tester reliability. So not just between testers, but also the same person testing, 3 months in between. We're going to get similar results, and any change in the result is due to actual improvement and not due to an error in the measurement. So we've gone down that path pretty well, and we have changed it slightly, but the same basic scoring structure appears, where we're looking to assess sort of 3 to 4 key criteria on each movement that we look at, and then it's scored out of 3. So it's very transparent in terms of what is required for how you would score an individual on a certain test. And then those numbers are quite quickly changed into a percentage, and then we get an overall percentage score for the athlete's movement competency. So I think one of the big drawaways I took from when Macca's actually presented on this at the ASCA in 2014, I believe, was why I like this version is that, a little bit of difference in opinion on something in this version is going to change the score from a 5 out of 9, for example, to a 6 out of 9 or a 7 out of 9. So it's only changing 2 ninths. Whereas if we look at the FMS from Cook and colleagues, is that, we have this concept of, it's a good 2 but not quite a 3, or, it's almost a 2, and those sort of things came up again and again. So I like this method because it's much easier to determine the same score and keep it consistently moving forward. And then the last thing we've kind of done with it is just to add on an extra piece to it, is that, well, we should be able to get our athletes to a point where they can single leg squat, overhead squat, lunge, push up, chin up with impeccable technique, So there is the point where you get to a stage where you go, well, what's the point of movement screening these guys if they can do those things well? Like, I know they can do these things well. I see them do it in training all the time. And then instead we can look to use maybe some more performance measures on top and go, well, okay, we've been assessing overhead squat with a dowel, with a broomstick. Now let's step up. So the next level of this assessment then is, well, what happens if we put load above your head? What happens if we put more load above your head? Okay, now do it in a dynamic fashion. Can we do a snatch balance with impeccable technique, holding the same positions that we required in the overhead squat? Can we now do a hang snatch using half of your body weight and, hold that for reps? So we wanted to get to the point where, yes, we're absolutely showing that we take an athlete who can barely stand on a single leg all the way through to doing some highly demanding exercises that require not just movement capacity, but the ability to generate force, to generate it quickly, and to be stable when you do that. So we wanted to work across the spectrum and also assess it in a valid and reliable manner.
Yeah, I think that a lot of coaches expect something that's not achievable with the movement screen. So I would say that the way you describe gives you a baseline, gives you and it might guide you when it comes to what needs to be done with a certain athletes from a general physical preparation standpoint. But people are just expecting that movement screens can predict injuries and that sort of things. Where I think that's just ridiculous. And it could be a good moderator or modifies the training load and effects of those training loads. But I also think that we forget that movement screen might be really general, and we might actually put some more specific or say domain/sport specific screens there as well, instead of only doing general one. As long as if one of the goals might be to try to predict the injury, if that's even possible. So my question will be, how does this screen differ from sport to sport? And just to connect to our previous question we had about the similarities and differences between sports.
Yeah. It's something I'm a big believer in is maintaining that creativity and flexibility between coaches. So part of this, the way that we've set it up is that, basically you choose the exercise and you choose the 3 movements, 4 movements, 5 movements, whatever you want for your sport. And they can be specific to the demands of it. Say, for example, if we're working with swimmers, obviously there's going to be a chin-up stream in there, and there's going to be some trunk control stuff in used in that screen. But then it shifts when it goes to another sport in terms of field hockey. We now need them to be able to, hop and stick exceptionally well. So there's got to be that measure in there, and then there's got to be single leg strength. So what I like about this method is we're not saying that there's 3 specific exercises that get used across the board, but you can interchange based on the demands of the sport.
So it's more modular.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Speaking about the estimates, you're also using a velocity estimates to help you monitor and program strength training in the gym. So what equipment are you using, and how does this affect your programming?
Yeah. I would start by saying we're probably pretty new into this overall. So we're still sort of wrapping our head around it, but we've really tried to look to those who've already done quite a lot in this area, like yourself. Basically, we've got, in terms of hardware, we've got a system produced by a company called EliteForm. Basically, it's a unit that sits on top of our squat racks, and it's got two cameras attached to it. And these cameras are able to determine where the bar is, and based on its movement, then output a velocity for us. What we've been finding is it's actually really, really good with our average velocity stuff. So we've looked to validate that against Vicom and also against LPT and Forceplate, and found it to be really good with our average velocity. So in terms of how we're using it in our programming, I think the one really, really valuable tool for me is knowing when an athlete has actually achieved an RM, or if they've still got a little bit in the bank. So going off the numbers that are out there at the moment with the sort of 0.3 meters per second for average velocity on our squats and deadlifts, that's probably the main area that I'm using it. And then with our bench press of going, well, an RM is effectively going to happen at about 0.15 meters per second. So for me, it's really good to know, well, what intensity are my athletes actually working at? Are they working maximally, or are they working sub-maximally? Or further to that, it could be that I actually do want them to work not at a maximal load, but I want them to work within specific velocity bands. So I might dictate things like within our bench press today, we want to move a little bit faster. So I'm going to set the band a little bit higher to be, I don't know, for example, 0.3 to 0.4 meters a second. Now the load then becomes determinant on what they can move at that velocity. So at all times, my intention of movement is as high as possible. And, then that's quite, what I like about it is it gives some immediate augmented feedback to the athlete. So this is information that isn't intrinsic to the movement. It's something that gives them a little bit extra to go, hey, you actually are moving that 80 kilos faster than you were last week. You are getting better. Or, for example, we could talk about the load that they can get to over time with their RM is now getting higher, and I know it's now a true RM, or maybe we've got a little bit more in the bank at your previous RM. So I like the velocity stuff because it just gives me another way of knowing, adding a little bit more evidence to say, is someone better or is someone worse, and how much so by.
In terms of creating instant feedback, what exercises do you do, and what type of feedback are you giving? Is it say height, mean, velocity, power, and are you? One thing I'm interested in is creating this, I would say, gamification between individuals or teams within teams.
Yeah.
So the boys can actually compete between themselves in certain metrics. And it's always tricky to create, I would say, equal playing field for heavier guys and stronger guys when it comes to velocity and power estimates. So I'm wondering if you implement similar strategies and try to create like a leaderboard and try to kind of give more gamification, to use this term, try to create more game-like strength training. And in my experience, it works well with team sport athletes because they're coming from a culture of competing between themselves, and where gym work is quite, I would say, plain for them. I'm talking mostly about soccer players, and creating some type of competition where two teams or sub teams can compete can increase the I would say motivation and increase the intensity in the gym. Have you been using something along those lines?
Yeah, Elite Form's actually got a really, really good setting within the system that basically you just set it to enable competition. So now, most of our athletes' programs have got individualization within them. So we might not have everyone doing exactly the same exercise. But say, for example, most of our squad is going to squat on a certain day. What we started doing was we just enabled competition. But as you said, we just had it at absolute numbers. So there's, within our rowing squad, there's the heavyweight guy who is a long way ahead of the rest of the group, and just day after day after day, he was winning this competition, and the name comes up across the tablet in front of the guy's screen. So and so is winning again today. So we had to be smart about that and adjust it back down to an average velocity for the percentage of load that they were asked to lift for that day. So we've got that prescribed load based on percentages of 1RM. And then we were enabling competition for them to compete against each other in real time using average velocity as the marker. So how quickly can you move that bar? And you guys know that you are each working at the same percentage of 1RM. So you may be stronger than you, but we're still working at the same relative intensity. Now let's get that bar moving. And that gamification sort of allows that to happen, and it's really, really well set up through the Elite Form system.
Yeah, I guess there are always nuances in how you set up and what metrics you use. And as you said, different guys might be, different weights, and they might have different, strength levels, or beginners versus advanced. And I don't believe there's like a, cookie cutter approach to creating a leaderboard. And sometimes it can backfire. People think it's always good to provide feedback, and if the metrics are not, I would say, intuitive for the athletes, and they might complain, why is he first? He's stronger than me. You know what I mean? So and can it can backfire and actually say decrease the the engagement of the athletes. And I think we need to be a bit more smarter when it comes to just implementing the leaderboards and things along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
So using these technologies and all these different ones, and collecting a lot of you pretty much end up collecting a lot of data. So the question is, how do you, or if you automate this collection, and how do you make meaning out of it? So instead of standing there and collecting data, I would rather prefer coaching and data to be collected automatically. So can you explain a little bit about the system you're using, and how do you make meaning out of it, and how does this information affects your planning or decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. The last point you sort of touched on there is like, how does it affect your planning and decision making? And I think that's fundamental to it, is that it's got to be actionable analysis. Like, I refuse to jump into collecting stuff just for the purpose of collecting stuff. Like, I don't see why you're going to invest energy when we're already time poor across the board. I don't know why you'd invest energy in collecting something when you don't have a reasonable outcome for it or how it's going to influence your programming. But in regard to how we're collecting our data, we actually did really, really well with the two companies that we're mainly working with, in Fusion Smarterbase and Eliteform. So Fusion were awesome in helping to set up this API that talks to the Eliteform servers and pulls down the data immediately from there and uploads it into our Smarterbase system. So there's no double handling of data anymore. What we had been doing was using the CSV reports from Eliteform and uploading them into Smarterbase. But this ended up being a reasonably time-consuming process. So like anything else, like you're talking about, we wanted to find a way to automate it. And unfortunately, those two companies were awesome in talking to each other and getting that to happen. So now we've effectively we've only really been doing this for about 6 weeks now. So we haven't done huge amounts with it. But in terms of what we can now do is that we're trying to create some dashboards. So it's nice and easy to jump into Smarterbase, click on it, click onto your individual athlete that you're going to look at and have a look at the trends in their strength training patterns that in their strength training that has happened over the last 6 weeks at a starting point. But then I'm really interested in having a look back at, over a longer period of time, what has happened with this individual and when have their test results then, what correlation has there been between what they've been doing in their strength training and when have their test results been maximized. So I don't think we do that particularly well at the moment, but this is sort of our next place is to go from sitting in Excel where we're all reasonably competent and doing our own things and, we've got our total volume load and we want to build that up, or percentage of 1 RM volume load, or whichever metric works for the individual. But then coming back to bringing us all into the same place, so then we can look at what's happening across our, 350 scholarship athletes to start to see some higher level things. So to go, across the board, this is what we know to be important. But then on the flip side of that, what I think is even more valuable is that we want to be able to have a far better understanding of the individual rather than just the group norms. Like a really, really cool Twitter feed is one called Research Wahlberg. It's basically Mark Wahlberg with research quotes posted on top of them. And one of my favorite ones is, I can work with the means, but I'd rather party with the outliers. And that's what we're looking for in elite sport. We're looking for outliers and we're looking for the ones who are doing the things that are allowing them to be successful. These outliers that are so far ahead of the group, like what is it that they are doing in their strength training that's allowing them to adapt and do really well? And I'm not sure we know exactly what that is at this point. But this sort of mass collection of data to put a lot of information around one individual, I think could help elucidate those findings a little bit more.
Yeah, my current, I would say, pet peeve is this concept of implementing some of the agile practices from IT, and they mostly implement that from, I would say, from risk of uncertainty and actually gaining some benefits of uncertainty of the market, of the user needs, and I see a lot of potential implementation in how we organize our training. So what, as strength conditioning coaches, what we pretty much know is this, I would call it negative knowledge, and we pretty much know what, I would say our knowledge is more robust in terms that what we know that doesn't work, as opposed to what is going to work for a particular athlete.
Yeah.
So, and you need to pretty much experiment a little bit, create like a fail-safe experiments for each individual, and see what actually sticks. It sounds funny, but it's actually how it is in the real world. And having all this data that's automatically collected, and as I like to call it, embedded testing. So you're pretty much testing during the workout instead of creating a specialized events. It can hopefully down the road can help you out identify certain patterns that might work for a particular athlete, and instead of just relying on anecdotal evidence and group averages.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's see what the future is going to bring. A lot of coaches are collecting more and more data. I'll say that next big step is going to be probably not technology. It's going to be more algorithms in identifying patterns or identifying actionable insights from all these tremendous data we are now pretty much focused on and collecting at the moment. Anyway, thank you very much, David, for all these great insights. I really enjoyed chatting to you, and thank you for contributing to Complementary Training podcast.
No worries.
As a final question, where can interested listeners can find more about you and your work?
Probably Twitter is the best place to find me. I'm at Dave Watts AU. To be perfectly honest, I'm probably more of an observer than a real contributor, but I try and throw my hat in the ring when I feel there's something I want to weigh in on. But yeah, if you want to get in contact, Dave Watts AU on Twitter is probably the best place.
Thanks a lot again, David, and good luck.
All right. Thanks, Len.